Good evening. The question whether Singapore should build an MRT system is before us. The magnitude of this question goes beyond whether we would like to ride in an air-conditioned underground train or not. The cost is extremely high, and the money will have to come out of the pockets of the Singaporeans. The point is whether our population growth and travel patterns in the future demand a mass transit system. And if we do, is the system of underground rail in the city centre and elevated tracks in the outskirts the best solution to adopt? Or is there a workable, perhaps cheaper alternative? Investigations on the MRT goes back to 1967 when the state and city planning studies were done. In the long-term concept plan for our development, it found that even if the bus system was significantly improved, it would not be able to cope with the needs by 1992. A rail-based MRT system was recommended to back up the buses. In a series of mass transit studies that were commissioned, Wilbur Smith and Associates, an American transport planning consultant firm, and a group of Singapore government planners wanted to find out if the rail-based MRT system was in fact better than an all-bus system. Three alternatives were laid out. Firstly, an improved all-bus system running on ordinary roads. Secondly, a rail-based MRT system complemented by the buses. And thirdly, a special all-bus system operating on underground or elevated roads specially reserved for these buses. Of the three, the MRT system was found to have the best cost-benefit ratio. A second mass transit study on the technical and financial aspects concluded that the full system would cost $1.75 billion in 1975, but the World Bank, which reviewed these Phase 2 findings, estimated that the cost would be 30% higher. The differences in the price estimates and other doubts which arose led in 1976 to a further study called the Land Use and Transportation Planning Review. The review concluded that the bus system would not be able to cope when employment in the CBD reaches 290,000 people in the year 1992. After that, a high-capacity mass rapid transit system will be needed. Now, one possibility that was considered was to restrict development in the CBD, but this study recommended against it. By 1976, 9 years after the MRT idea was first mooted, careful studies were still being carried out because of the size and the impact that such a major project would have. In the same year, 1976, Mr. Ong Teng Cheong, the then Minister of State for Communications, chaired a committee to study the requirements for an MRT. It considered the possibility of holding down the number of people in the CBD by controlling employment. But in the end, the Ong Teng Cheong report found that the MRT would still be needed by the late 80s. Since 1976, 3 more studies were carried out to review the options. The Scott study drew up a consolidated land use and transport policy for Singapore and recommended preliminary engineering studies on the MRT to try and get a precise and final definition of the MRT routes. A Ministry of Defence study carried out in 1978 considered the possibility of building a second CBD in Tanjong Rhu to relieve the congestion in the present central area. But the MINDEF team predicted that even with Tanjong Rhu, the buses would not be able to solve the traffic congestion by the year 2003. The current Phase 3 mass transit study, being done by a consortium of consultants and staff from the Public Works Department, are trying to determine the engineering designs, the routes, and the costs of the system. In 1979, the estimated cost was $4 billion for a rail-based MRT system. So far, all studies seem to point to the necessity of an MRT system to solve the transportation problems of Singapore. But into all this has come an MRT review team invited by Dr. Goh Keng Swee to re-examine whether there are, in fact, other options. Kenneth Hansen and his team from Harvard think there is. Robert Hubbard and the team from Wilbur Smith and Associates think not. Tonight, we present Kenneth Hansen and Professor John Kane, representing the MRT review team, and Robert Hubbard and Bruno Wildermuth of Wilbur Smith and Associates in the MRT debate.
Good evening. Tonight we are here to try to understand what I believe a very complex problem, and that is what would be the best choice for Singapore and Singaporeans in the way of public transportation system. On the one hand, we have an all-bus system. On the other hand, we have a bus-cum-train system, and we also have a whole range of systems in between. When I first thought about the public transportation system, I thought it would be a matter of engineering study or computer calculation. But as I have been listening to more debates, more discussions, and has been reading more reports, I realized that the issue is not just engineering or mathematics. It is also a question of judgment. I also feel that tonight, since we are talking about judgment, we will try to see whether we can bring to you some idea as to how any system or all the system would affect you as the user of public transportation. Somewhere along the line, we also have to keep in mind that should we make any choice in the public transportation system, how is it going to affect the future development of the city? And also, in the end, we also should not forget about its impact on the users of motor cars. So this evening, we have the two consulting teams here to introduce to us the subject matter. On my right, we start with Mr. Kenneth Hansen, who is the project director of the MRT review team. He also has been an official in the US government and currently consultant to various international organizations and governments on economic issues and urban transportation problems. Next to him is Professor John Kane, who has been the principal investigator on the MRT review team. Among his other positions, he also is a chairman of the Department of City and Regional Planning in the Kennedy School of the Harvard University. On my left-hand side, we have Mr. Robert Hubbard, who is the Senior Executive Vice President of the Wilbur Smith and Associates from the United States. Next to him, Bruno Wildermuth is a Director of the Systems Analyst Division of the Wilbur Smith and Associates. Mr. Wildermuth was resident in Singapore between 1972 and 76 for the mass transit studies. Next, I would like to introduce the various members on the panels. Starting on my right is Mr. Milton Tan, who is the President of the Automobile Association of Singapore. Next to him is Mr. Ma Bao Tan, Assistant General Manager of the Singapore Bus Service. Then we have Professor Bill Lim, Dean of the Faculty of Architecture and Building Science in the National University of Singapore. On my left, we have Mr. Toh Tian Se, Assistant news editor of the Straits Times. Next to him, Mr. Wong Nanjiang, the general manager of the Overseas Chinese Banking Corporation. And finally, we have Mr. Joseph Yi, who is the senior executive engineer in the roads branch of the Public Works Department. I would like to start the discussion by asking the MRT review team to present their views on this subject matter. I hope that in the process they would also touch on a few questions, such as why they think that an all-bus system would work for Singapore. What do they see are the shortcomings, if any, of the bus rail system? And particularly, I would like to know what are the main features of their proposed all-bus system. So Ken?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I first discussed the urban transport problem of Singapore with First Deputy Prime Minister Dr. Goh earlier this year, he said in effect, for the past 5 or more years, we have been told that we have no alternative but to build a large, expensive rail MRT system as soon as feasible, and we're told by many others that it is inevitable, or else we face the prospect of hopeless urban congestion in the decades ahead. And he asked, essentially, is this true? Or do we have a lot more time with the existing bus system? Or are there alternative systems or less costly systems or a different strategy to provide good, convenient, reliable urban transportation for Singapore in the years ahead? We've now presented our report to the Cabinet with regard to these questions and others. And discussions are continuing within the government at all levels and with the press and various public forums. This process is being continued, and this distinguished forum tonight is a continuation of that. Now, our findings are quite clear. First, we believe we have established the fact that Singapore does not face a near-term doomsday situation regarding public transportation, which requires the previously proposed extensive Phase 2, Phase 3 rail MRT. In other words, Singapore will not and need not choke on its own traffic in 1992, which is the focus of a lot of our technical studies. Second, we have urged, however, that the existing bus system be vastly improved by stages and in concert with freeway construction and regulation, some extension of restraint on automobile use, and numerous traffic and engineering measures, which obviously have to be determined by operational studies by the officials concerned and with other consultants, I'm sure. Third, we believe that these improvements in the bus system should be directed toward establishing a high-performance express bus system of the type that we have basically described in our final report, the principles of which we have described, which we also assert will prove feasible to accommodate projected peak-hour commuting requirements to the central area for 1992 and beyond, and moreover, substantially improve all island public transportation so that all citizens of Singapore will benefit from their investments in public transportation. We remind you that 75% of trips made by Singaporeans in the decades ahead will be by bus, even if you build a rail MRT. Now, fourth, we compared this high-performance express bus systems with the various all-bus proposals of previous studies. These studies led to the earlier recommendation, as you know, that a rail MRT was required at an early date and that the economic benefits of such investments would be greater than the economic costs. We found these earlier comparisons to be deficient in the various ways we point out in our report, not certainly in all respects at all, but substantially that the all-bus systems compared, we did not believe were the optimal systems to compare, And secondly, that the proposed Phase 2, Phase 3 MRT appeared on the basis of that analysis to be a marginal investment for Singapore. Now, consistent with our assignment, we have also analyzed alternative rail MRT systems, and we have compared those to the proposed larger Phase 3 MRT. We have identified a number of different elevated and underground limited rail systems which would perform the essential function of central area commuting completely satisfactorily. I would stress that these are options that were not, in fact, perceived before and evaluated before in this manner. This is the matrix by which we look at these, and fundamentally, as you will see, we have on this line an improvement of the existing bus system, which we say should be done in any event. Everybody's been somewhat waiting for the miracle of a mass transit system to happen, and this progress is not going fast enough for Singapore's benefit. We suggest that that measure in the 1985-86 period be translated as soon as your freeways come on stream and you have other measures taken into this high-performance express bus system that we're speaking about. Then you continue with that system. Ultimately out here, if some of these very substantial estimates of growth and so on, which we find somewhat unrealistic, occur, you can always resort to another system. Now, among these options, of course, there is the option of the three-line rail underground system, and that is before the government and should remain before, and we are not rejecting that. We are putting this on a comparative basis. We're in effect saying an improved bus system should go with that, obviously, and the principles that we're suggesting might be included with it. Now we have several other categories: the limited underground rail systems with an express bus system, and there are various configurations of that which give better distribution characteristics and other aspects, but the basic point is that they are, in our view, very cost effective and they do the job. We also suggested that there be reconsideration of the concept of elevated systems. Everybody's used to thinking of the Third Avenue L or the Chicago system or something else. In fact, today there are many ways, proper ways, to integrate elevated structures into cityscape and perform very positive functions in that regard. So we have, in fact, suggested three versions of this with various distribution system characteristics. Finally, we included here, just as an example, a description of the possible people mover systems, as an example of other technologies that can be reviewed within the time span we're discussing. Now, going back to these limited rail systems, I'll show you very briefly on this chart just one fundamental fact. Compared to the estimated capital cost of the main system, these various systems are 1/2 or less of the cost of that system, and they carry the passengers, and they certainly have substantial indications of economic viability. So there are choices among options, and these are ranked and rated fundamentally from an economic and other points of view. There are other considerations, but those are the fundamental options that we have now presented to the government as we were asked. Now, in the course of our work, since the transportation system should be designed to serve urban development objectives and processes, we have also made several observations about the projections and the directions of urban growth and development that are evidently being planned for Singapore. We have urged the consideration of several possible approaches to achieving greater population and employment balance, and by this means reducing transportation requirements and the burdens on urban travelers. And possible ways have been suggested by us without restricting the growth and dynamism of the Singapore economy to distribute the growth that you seek in a manner to enhance Singapore's livability, attractiveness, and economic viability. We are not anti-growth in this regard. We are urging another look at the direction and the form of growth, and the transportation system that is designed should support and assist in that process. Now, there are many other meritorious options in urban development strategy, just as there are options in this area. My final point is simply this: as you discuss the viability or the efficacy or the possible manageability of these various systems we're talking about, especially the all-bus system, we observe that Singapore is outstanding in the world in its application of enlightened principles of urban development and urban transportation. There is just no question about that. And these are principles which relate fundamentally to according street space to people rather than vehicles, to according safety and convenience to pedestrians, and to charging for the use of public resources on the basis of the use to which they're put. Now, if you persist, and we're certain that you will, in those principles, and would certainly urge you to do so, we think that you can solve these problems. It isn't only hardware that solves problems of transportation. It is the principles that you apply to your urban life.
Ken, I think we have just heard Ken broadly outlining the rationales of his proposal for an all-bus system, emphasizing that there is no assumption or constraint on the urban development. I hope later we have a chance to look at your concept of the express system and also maybe the exchange system.
Yes.
But before that, could we ask the Wilbur Smith team, starting with Bud, to talk to us about your thinking on the public transportation system?
To give a bit of background, the work that we undertook between 1972 and 1976 was simply stated to compare the merits of alternative systems on some common ground basis. In this evaluation, which was completed in 1976, we felt that the bus rail system was shown to yield higher benefits to Singapore than the all-bus system. This did not imply, of course, that the bus rail system would not require a substantial financial commitment. Benefits were compared on common grounds. The measurements and the analytical procedures which were used had been accepted widely as applicable to urban transportation, and I understand that Mr. Hansen has acknowledged that these evaluation procedures basically are the same ones that he would agree to employ. Our firm has never said that the all-bus system would not work. We have never in any of our reports predicted a doomsday, as has been implied. What we said, in fact, was that its operating conditions, even with the assumed Phase 2 express bus services and planned improvements on roads and expressways, will yield congestion costs and disbenefits to commuters, which would be greatly reduced by implementing a bus MRT combination system. Our bus system assumed the full expressway system that Singapore has now in the planning, design, and construction stages by 1992. Mr. Hansen, I believe, has assumed in his team's work the same operating system for express service. It is the implicit assumptions, Mr. Moderator, made on many of the operating details in the Hansen team report that we take issue with and disagree on. And perhaps there'll be some way to get meeting of the minds on clarifications. The MRT developed in the Phase 2 report was optimally located to serve the jobs and homes of Singaporeans. The alignment was adjusted during the course of the study to achieve a desired pattern that would have reduced the amount of transfers from fee to service and enable a large number of walk-in patrons. In fact, 57% of Singapore's 1992 population would reside within 1 mile of the MRT lines. Likewise, 53% of the employment or job locations in Singapore would be within 1 kilometer of the MRT line. The Hansen team report has made reference to the possibilities of using people mover systems, such as in Los Angeles specifically. We feel that this system, which has a limited capacity of 3,500 passengers per hour, is not suitable for the heavy transport demands in Singapore. There are other factors also that can be explored later. Reference was made to an elevated rail system, and of course, these items were studied and discussed during the phase 1 of the program. The steering committee made the policy decisions of looking at these as alternatives and chose the underground section to be about 1/3, about 15 kilometers of the total system to be underground. Now, the illustration of the map behind me shows the proposed system. The MRT alignment is shown in the blue band, running from Bedok on the east through the central area to Jurong on the west. And the north-south segment runs from the central area north through Ang Mo Kio. What is shown in the orange lines are the Singapore expressway system that is under construction and final design segments today. In certain parts, such as central area, is still under preliminary studies. But it shows the East Coast Parkway, the Pan Island Expressway, the Jurong Expressway, the Central Area Expressway, routes expressways up to Woodlands, and expressways through Ang Mo Kio up to Woodlands to join there. The total system of bus rail is shown here. When all bus was compared with bus rail, we deleted the blue line and therefore took out the MRT. So that was the basis of the comparisons. Mr. Wilbur has a few comments that he'd like to make concerning the findings of our work and how we evaluate the situation.
In a few minutes, can you sketch out your thinking on this?
Well, perhaps taking off where Bart left off, we could say that the MRT system, as proposed, did in fact carry only 25% of the people who would board a public transport vehicle. However, it did carry 36% of the public transport travel in terms of passenger kilometers, considerably more than the 25%. As was mentioned before, 54% of all rail trips would be walk-in, walk-off. That is, people could walk from their home to the rail station, they could ride the train, get off and walk to their job. A further 38% would require only one transfer. That is, they would use a bus either at the start of their journey or at the end of their journey. People could travel on the system at an average of 45 kilometers per hour. Not very fast, but considerably faster than they can travel today in buses, and considerably more greater comfort in that it's a smooth ride on a rail system. These are some of the things that perhaps should be said. And in fact, just to give a few more indications, this is what a typical station would be looking like, where passengers can wait in comfort, not exposed to the elements. Now, there were also a number of other sections planned with elevated sections and elevated stations, such as this one, which is the one proposed for Clementi Newtown. It is our main concern in the analysis that was done by Mr. Hansen's team that we feel some lack of concern for the consumer. And these are some of the points that we have been very critical about. The fact that large concentrations of people are expected to be boarding buses on curbsides, that such large concentrations would require all sorts of arrangements, barriers, and certainly would take a lot of space to be concentrated along the curbsides. In fact, it's quite clear that on the heavy stops, not only would we require a lot more pavement space than we have there today, but we would have to have dual bus lanes so that the buses could easily pull in and out. This, of course, would affect the general capacity of the road system, despite the fact that the claim was made, and I would like to quote, "The all-bus system would provide a dramatic increase in travel speeds and greatly alleviate the central street capacity problem."
Bruno, can we ask Ken or John whether they want to add something on the concept of the all-bus system? Go for some discussion first before we carry on.
Yeah, I think there are a couple issues that are worth commenting on, and it really has to do with the design of the express bus system, which is one of the key issues that we're concerned with. And there are really two aspects of that problem I think we need to address. The first of these is Mr. Wildermuth has referred to as the large volumes, the large numbers of people who will board the buses at particular points within the central area. His assessment lists one estimate, I believe, of 8,000 boardings in the Robinson Road corridor. And we have a display here that this express bus route runs from the Badak terminal to the East Coast Parkway and then up onto Robinson and Keppel Road. As you can see, it has 1, 2, 3, 4 stops in the central area. Actually, it's a PM peak route, and so the way we envision this operating is the bus would begin at this first point, go to 2, 3, 4, then nonstop to the Badak terminal. What's shown at the Badak terminal is a feeder for this Badak terminal. Now, at issue here is how you would go about handling the roughly 2,282 persons who would board these 4 stops during the peak hour. As I say, that's the boardings, estimated boardings in 1992 for the Badak service. What's important to understand is that there are 11 services that serve Robinson Road. One of the observations was that there was no allowance for unloading passengers on this system. That's absolutely incorrect. We've used the rather conventional measure of 1.6 seconds per passenger unloading, which is in fact conservative given the nature of the system that we have in mind, particularly the intention to collect fares at the Badak terminal and possibly to use platform boarding and certainly to use two double-door buses. The way the calculations are done is there's 1.6 seconds for each boarding passenger. The links connecting these nodes each assume 30 kilometers per hour speeds, so that you board, say, as an example here, and I'll come back to this, a fourth of the passengers at node 1 here. You then proceed at 30 kilometers an hour to node 2, board another fourth, 30 kilometers an hour, and so on. Until you get to the East Coast Parkway, we assume that on the East Coast Parkway, you can proceed at 60 kilometers per hour. You leave the East Coast Parkway then and can manage 40 kilometers per hour into the Badak terminal. Now, what's important about this concept is the fact that the buses make so few stops. And in particular, something like only 17% of the kilometers on this service are done in the central area, 73% on the East Coast Parkway, and only 9% getting off the Parkway to the Badak terminal. Now, as I say, there are a number of problems with this. One of the problems has to do with the number of passengers that board at each of these stops. And if you look at number 4 here, we have something like 1,200 passengers boarding, which translates into something like...
Do you have a diagram showing?
No, I don't, but I have a number. Translates into, I believe it is 13 buses that would operate in 4. This illustrates the basic principles of this operation. Because something like half of all the boardings occur at this node 4, it would be in fact possible to divide this service into 2 services. One of them would in fact have around 12 buses and would proceed from node 4 to the Badak terminal. The second service would serve the other 3 nodes and would again proceed directly to the Badak terminal. So to sum up, and I'm sorry I've taken so long, the principles are, first, high speeds on each of these links that arise because we don't have congestion interference, and in particular because by segregating the links, we can operate as many services as turn out to be economical, that is as many services as can be used at 10-minute headways. That, I think, give you a little better idea there.
Thank you, John. I think perhaps at this stage, it's my intention that we have a pretty good overview of what the 2 groups of consultants are talking about. Both the panels and the viewers have some rough ideas. So I would like to let the panels to raise some questions first. I thought perhaps we'll start with Bao Tan, because you're from the bus service, Singapore bus service.
Yes, thank you, Taika. I think first of all, I would like to make the point that conceptually, there is really nothing wrong or new about the express services that is, I believe, the mainstay of the all-bus system that you have proposed. There are small differences, the main ones being that your buses travel on expressways, ours don't. The simple reason is because expressways do not exist at the moment. But as I said, we agree with the concept of an express bus service, and in fact, we are implementing these services since '75, and we keep on doing this now. So my initial reaction to the figures that came out in your report, the fact that we needed only 2,700 buses in 1992, and knowing that today we operate 2,400 buses. So when I saw that, according to those figures, we only needed 300 more buses in 10 years' time, and yet providing a level of service which is claimed to be comparable to the MRT in terms of traveling time, comfort, convenience, and so on. Initial reaction was, why are we talking about an MRT? Unfortunately, in going into the details, we found quite a number of questions which to us are important ones and which we would like to seek clarification on. Because it is these details, from these details, we arrive at those figures that I was talking about earlier, those figures which to us sounded very optimistic. So, if I may, I would like to go through a few of these and seek some clarification from you. The first one is regarding operating speeds. Now, you have explained to us earlier and tonight regarding the use, the fact that the speeds were much higher because there's less congestion and that you're using expressways and so on. Even allowing for that fact, the figures that you are postulating and that you think that the buses can run in 1992 are much, much higher than what we feel are either reasonable speeds or safe speeds. In fact, the differences are large enough for us to question whether there has been any empirical studies done to show that these speeds are attainable. Let me give you an example. Feeder services in new towns. You postulate 40 or 39 kilometers per hour. We are averaging 15 to 20 kilometers per hour. So there is a difference of 2 or 3 times. What we are wondering is, how is the situation going to change in 10 years' time in new towns, such that we can operate twice or even 3 times as fast? There's not going to be any expressways built. In fact, the congestion may be even worse. So that is a very important question for us, because if you can run faster, then obviously you need less buses. Our second point of clarification is the number of point-to-point express services. As I said earlier, we are not against the concept of point-to-point express services, but I get the impression in the report that you are gathering people from further away than is necessary in order to justify point-to-point expresses to the amount which you are indicating in your report. So, the effect of this really means that more people are being made to transfer unnecessarily. I hope that this is not the case, and I would like to seek clarification.
Yes, I'd like to elaborate where Mabutan left off about speeds and assumed speeds in the 1992 road network. Although on that map there you see a very elaborate, comparatively elaborate network of expressways for 1992 on a very relatively small island, our travel forecasts show that many of these expressways will be very heavily loaded in 1992. Although some of them are built up to dual 4 lanes, in other words 4 traffic lanes in each direction. Now I have my doubts on the ability of express buses on expressways ever attaining average overall speeds that the Hansen team has assumed. We have in traffic engineering terms what we call a level of service. As the number of vehicles along the expressway increase, and we are talking of peak hour conditions, traffic speeds will drop, ability to maneuver will drop. And my judgment is, looking at the kind of forecast volumes that we have on the expressways, it will be extremely difficult to have an expressway bus attaining an average overall speeds of even 50 kilometers per hour. Unless, of course, very drastic traffic management measures are implemented on the expressways, things like ram metering or some form of toll that the team has suggested. Now, this has got some other drawbacks. It means that other road users will be affected. It also means that these people who are affected will be diverted to the local road system, and in the process congesting our local road system. Now, much of the road users for the expressways are not just cars alone. We have a growing economy, and our forecast for truck traffic, for instance, is considerable. And we surely don't want all these to get onto the road system. So, in short, I would summarize, I have grave doubts on the assumed speeds that the Hansen team has assumed
Maybe let's
in
hear
their